Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode here at Bulletproof Selling. My name is Sean Rhodes, and I am the Chief Sales Sergeant here at Bulletproof Selling and author of the book Bulletproof Selling, a guide for systemizing sales on the battlefield of business. Here at Bulletproof Selling, we believe that hope is not a sales strategy. So we've been coming back to you every week for years now to help you understand what are the ways that hope might be entering the picture for you, and what are the ways that we can remove it? So over the course of a few years now, we've had on best-selling authors, Hall of Fame speakers, folks that are out there in the field managing teams. And with every one of our guests, we ask the question, where do they see hope factoring into the way that their salespeople or their clients serve and sell? And out of every one of these episodes, we build a system to overcome that hope, a system that you'll be able to use no matter the size of your team or the size of your goals. Now, across all the teams that I get to work with, and I'm crossing a lot of different industries in the keynotes that I do and the consulting work that I do inside of teams to help them remove hope from how they sell, something has occurred to me. It was the first couple of engagements that I ever went on as a consultant, as someone that was brought in from the outside to look at what sales teams were doing well, help them repeat their wins and eliminate their losses. And I noticed that, of course, between different industries, they use really different terminology for what a lead is or what a prospect is or what an opportunity is. But something that began to occur to me as I began to work more and more in longer term engagements with these teams is that even on the teams, the language wasn't entirely clear. What one team called a lead or a prospect was not what the other team called it, even if they're working for the same company, sometimes even if they're on the same team. So today's guest is going to help us unravel this, to talk about the importance of language as it applies to salespeople, as it applies to how we can get better, how we can remove hope. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to welcome to the show Mr. Russ Hawkins, who's going to teach us a lot about the power of language and removing hope from how we sell. So Russ, welcome, sir, to Bulletproof Selling. It is an honor to have you on the show.
Well, it's great to be here. Thank you so much, Sean. I appreciate the opportunity to chat with you.
So Russ, talk to us a little bit about your sales career, the company that you get to run today, who you serve, how you serve them. Let's get your quick bio.
Well, I think I started selling when I came out of the womb, to be honest with you. From the beginning, trying to get what I wanted to achieve done throughout my personal life. And I started in sales because I grew up poor, and being in sales was a way to control my own destiny without having to put up capital. So, I've done all kinds of different things. I ran some of my own small businesses back when I was a teenager. And then ultimately, when I graduated from college, I ended up entering into the telecom business, selling telephone systems, and I did that for a couple of small companies at first, and then ultimately with Ma Bell. And I'm going to date myself a little bit here. This is way back in the breakup of the Bell system in the 1980s, and I was very successful at doing that. I successfully made a major transition to becoming a sales manager. Not always easy to do if you're a good salesperson. There are two different types of personalities required there, and skill sets, of course. And then kind of just graduated from there. Ended up having bigger and bigger jobs with larger and larger numbers of people at AT&T. Ultimately left to join the startup world as a startup sales vice president for a very small company. I was able to grow that company successfully by tenfold and sell it to a private equity company. Subsequently worked for another company that was in the high performance computing area. Again, in these roles, I made the transition to becoming the CEO, and basically I've never stopped selling my entire life. So I'm three tech companies behind me, and working on the fourth one right now, and hopefully we'll be selling this company at some point in the future.
That's amazing, sir. So it sounds like you've got a little bit of a record of success, which is a good thing, which means that you're probably pretty good at identifying issues and addressing them so that they're permanently solved, something that we had to learn to do in the military for sure. So I'm curious then, in all the salespeople that you got to work with as a salesperson, that you got to manage, and then that you got to hire, recruit, train, and sometimes have to fire, I'm sure, where did you see them falling back on hope more than they should? What's a common denominator that you saw across all of those companies?
Well, I mean, I still see it today. The biggest issue that I see is not having a common understanding of the words that we're using, and not having a common vocabulary, if you will, about sales process, about sales stages, even about the nature of the people that you're selling to. So one of the things I spend a lot of time on is repetitively going over what we mean by certain words in our dialogue with our salespeople.
And if I'm a sales leader, or even if I'm just, a frontline salesperson, how do I know that there's a problem with this? Because I know what I know these terms to mean, but how will I know that this isn't being translated properly to my manager? Or if I'm the chief revenue officer of a company, how do I know that my teams might be suffering from using the same words but in different ways?
Well, because you'll end up screwing up the deal. I mean, basically, I mean, if you have for example, people talk about this concept of a champion in a firm. Champion that isn't self-defined, right? You need to have a clear understanding of what a champion is, and what I believe a champion is somebody that will risk their own personal capital inside the company for the benefit of the vendor. Most people don't use that definition, and same thing with economic buyers. Everybody talks about economic buyers, but they often have different views of it. So what happens is the way you know it's not working is you get to the end stage where a rep is forecasting a deal, and it's the end of the quarter, like we are this week, by the way, and then you find out that they didn't have the same definition, that their champion really wasn't a champion. They were more of a coach, or the sign-off process, the close plan was flawed because they didn't understand what a close plan was. Or they choose, and sometimes, unfortunately, they choose to ignore what they maybe know in the classroom. They ignore it when they get out in the field. They forget everything they've learned, and they bounce back and start relying on their gut feel on everything. And so you know it by missed deals. That's what happens. What happens is you can't have a predictable forecast that's repeatable on a regular basis.
And I've seen this happen, of course, at the micro level, the things you just mentioned, but I've also seen it happen at even the deal stage. And you mentioned, not closing the amount of deals that you had projected. Well, if we don't have a common terminology for what a deal is, like what qualifies it as a deal? Is it just having the name and the phone number and the company of the potential client? Or is it having good data and intelligence and conversation notes and maybe a proposal that's been out and approved? There's all these things that could tie in to really what qualifies something as a deal or as a prospect or as a lead. So let's build a system to help teams address this. It's going to be a fun time, and I know that you and I are up to the task because of your experience in sales, first of all, because we're going to try to create a system that's going to help any team really define the terms that they're using, even if there are dozens of terms that any salesperson might use in the course of a day. So we can definitely choose a few of them that we know where salespeople are going to run into, but I'm really love to build a system with you that's going to help us map out and determine, hey, what do these things actually mean, so that when I say deal, we're speaking the same language.
Right.
So in the military, every single system that we built on the battlefield, and we were constantly building new ones, every one of them helped us remove more hope from how we operated. So as a Marine running around battlefields with other Marine units, I saw systems at play all the time. Every single one of them trimmed hope away. So here at Bulletproof Selling, we do the same thing. We trim hope from how salespeople operate with these systems. So we use this acronym TRIM because, hey, the military is great on acronyms, aren't they? So
AT&T was the killer, the inventor of acronyms. So.
They are the inventor of acronyms. So the T in TRIM is the trigger. Now, if I'm a salesperson and I want to get better at making sure that we're all speaking the same language on my team or in my company, what is the trigger for this system? Is it when I notice that we're not speaking the same language? Is it maybe at the beginning of a time period like a quarter where we just take a look at a couple new terms and have a common definition and start building a sales dictionary? When do you recommend I trigger taking a hard look at the terms we're using to make sure we are speaking the same language?
Well, I think one of the places that it becomes very obvious is during the QBRs, or the quarterly business reviews, or the funnel reviews, or whatever you might want to call them. Most companies, and my company included, has a set of criteria to move a deal through a process. And when you're in a QBR and all the pressure's on that rep, it becomes pretty obvious pretty quickly that if you're talking past each other. And these sessions, they shouldn't be interrogations. They should be conversations, and we should be checking our syntax, checking our vocabulary as we go through, to make sure that we're talking about the same thing. So it's essentially not relying on what the high level word is, but digging down underneath it and trying to figure out what is really happening, what you really mean. So I think it's during, funnel reviews. I think it can be very, very obvious. That's obviously a trigger from my perspective.
I love it. So it's always a matter of looking at where's the difference between the goals that we had and the results. And even if someone is crushing their goals, you can still look at it and say, you're absolutely going to meet number, or you've met number. Let's take a look at how this could have been even better, or what would you have done differently. And I guarantee that in the answer to those questions, you'll find a misalignment of terms, even if the person is succeeding, right? So
without a doubt.
It's a great point. So we've got the trigger taken care of then. Do this quarterly during that review. Now, the R in trim is making this a repeatable process. So if you're coaching a sales manager, and you've had plenty of opportunities to do this in your career, so I know you know exactly where we're going to go here. If you're coaching a manager during that quarterly review, when you're helping your team better define their terms, what are those 4 or 5 steps you would want them to walk through every time when we're looking at something like what is a deal, or what is a qualified lead? What are those 4 or 5 steps you'd want to walk through to get everybody back on the same page?
So I think I have this phrase that I use, which is substantive discussion. And we can even often disagree on what that means, but I try to be very careful and clear with people what a substantive discussion is. It is not an email. It is not a phone call. It is not an exchange during those times. It is an in-depth discussion, mostly listening for the rep, mostly listening to the person. And if you can train people to listen, you can train them to hear what is being said, then you can help them understand how to take the information that they're gathering and delivering it and deliver it back. And if you can do that on a repetitive basis, if you can listen to what the customer's saying, you can identify the opportunities for either growth from something that they're not doing, or to solve some kind of problem that they're preventing them from doing things, and you do that over and over and over again, you will be successful. And if you can apply that at every level of the sales process, from the initial discovery calls all the way through getting the contract signed. If you can listen and then return that stuff back in a way that's meaningful to that customer, that's going to solve a problem or exploit an opportunity, then you'll win. And if you can't do that, then you're not going to win.
Then you're not going to win. So if I'm a sales manager, then I'm curious how you would, give me that checklist. So, Russ, I'm about to step into this meeting with a salesperson. They're not quite meeting goal. I think there's probably a misunderstanding of what their goal was, or what a deal actually is, because I'm noticing their pipeline's not where it should be. What is that checklist you would give me? Like, here are the 4 or 5 things to do in this meeting that you need to, say have been done in order for this to have been a successful outcome. What would you tell that manager to do?
Well, I mean, I think there are a couple of things. First of all, we like to use trial closes, and so focusing on the extent to which that rep has been using the trial closes that we've identified. One of them, for example, is an NDA. Getting an NDA signed, getting that. That's probably the lowest level one that we have, and we have a series of other sign-offs where that rep has to have taken a specific action or gotten some kind of agreement and alignment with the customer. So the first thing I would tell you is to make sure that you review all of those points with the rep. Make sure you understand whether they're meeting those minimum criteria. Secondly is, to display some amount of kind of what I'll call urgent curiosity about the deal, right? When you're talking to a rep, if you're listening as a sales manager, this listening thing doesn't end with the salesperson. It goes all the way up to the CEO, in my view. And if you're listening carefully during a QBR or a funnel review, then you'll be able to ask intelligent questions that will get you closer to the answer. Approach it as a teaching opportunity, not as an inquisition. That would be the third piece of advice that I would give you. Your job isn't to be a glorified scorekeeper here. Your job is to develop salespeople that can operate without you. And so you've got to focus on teaching, coaching, improving the capabilities of that person. And then the last thing I would say is, try to be positive.
Always a good thing with salespeople. I know we all appreciate that a lot more when it's a positive conversation. Even
Absolutely.
if it's not a goal, it's all right. You didn't meet goal. How are we going to fix this? How are we going to make it better? And how can I support you? Let's build a plan. Let's
Right.
talk about ways. So,
Let's
great.
talk about what do you think you did wrong? What do you
Yeah,
think you could do better?
yes.
Right?
Because if I think hard enough, I can probably come up with it. And if it's coming from me, it's more likely to get action taken on it rather than you saying, "Well, Sean, make more calls, buddy, or better qualify your deals, or whatever that might look like." So that's
Yeah,
a
which
great,
is those are very, very high level commentaries. I mean, I recently had a situation with a deal that we spent 6 months negotiating a contract. We had gone through many, many dollars of legal fees, got up to the final sign off, and the CIO basically convinced the CEO that he could do it himself internally. He didn't need to buy our software. Now, why did we learn that? Why did we have to go to the moment of signature before we learned that? There's a big learning opportunity there. And so we had a postmortem on this thing. And that's the question I asked the sales rep. I said, well, what would you have done differently here? Now that you've seen what happened, you wasted your time, you've wasted your boss's time, you've wasted my time, we've wasted lawyers' times. What would you do differently? And he came pretty quickly to the conclusion that he had to understand the buying process for that particular company, who was going to sign off. And you always, in the software business, my view is you always have to bring in the CIO. Always have to bring in the CIO. So hopefully it was a learning opportunity for him. Seemed like it was. And I want to eliminate those situations if I can.
And you just covered the I in trim, which is to make this an improvable process, something that we had to constantly do to keep up to speed on a battlefield. We got to do it in sales too. So you're saying sit down with your rep, figure out, let's take that deal, that big problem, or if it's a quarterly review and they had a great quarter, let's pick the largest deal they closed, right? There's always something to debrief and review that we can use to benefit the team. And you're saying take a look at where did we misunderstand terms? Because usually it's not because the rep was incompetent. It's because they didn't understand what was actually required in company process or in policy. Always got to bring in the CIO in the example you just gave me that we can do a better job of next time. So to close a deal or to issue a proposal, what it means in this company to issue a proposal is conversation with the CIO. CIO has to be on that call or whatever that might be inside of your process. So that's a great.
Well, what was frustrating about that situation is it is in our process, right? And even though it was in the process, he decided that his relationship with the people that he was talking to was strong enough that he believed that he did not need to check that box to go through that process. And that's just it's a recipe for failure. It's you have to have a repeatable process. You have to trust the process, and you have to live in the process. And hopefully that was another lesson that they took away from this.
I think so. It's because the more that we can define terms and be able to align to them, the better that process flows. Because I've been on plenty of teams, and I'm sure you have as well. Very built out process, no alignment.
Absolutely.
And we know what happens there. The results just don't appear.
And a lot of that can be done by having a pre-meeting, whatever kind of meeting it is, whether it's a internal sales meeting or a meeting with a customer, having a set of objectives for that meeting, having a common set of objectives, understanding what those set of objectives are. That's also part of having a common vocabulary, right? That's also part of having a common understanding of what we're trying to do. And if you can do that, do you have the experience and then do a debrief afterwards, you're going to improve the process. You're going to pick out the things you didn't do well, and it's going to be a continuous improvement. What the Japanese call it Kaizen, right?
Kaizen, that's right. Yep, I love that. I love that. So then we've got something that I know as a CEO you're going to be very interested in, because the M in trim is to measure this. As a salesperson, if I'm taking the time to really define terms, to maybe even check them, all right, I'm about to create a deal. Does it match the criteria of what we've all agreed the definition of a deal is in my company? It's going to take me a little more time than just, popping something into the CRM and moving on with my day. So I have to justify this. And as a manager, I want to justify this as well. So how am I going to measure the success of this? That we're all speaking the same language, we're operating from the same vocabulary. Is it just deal throughput? Is it pipeline acceleration? What would you recommend I measure to see, are we really speaking the same language?
Well, one of the things I like to do is to have sales representatives run the meeting, run the review. And very quickly you will find if there are deltas in the interpretation of what certain words or what steps in the process are done. So we like to do that. We like to have cross-functional people represented, not just the sales and sales management people. We like to have some of our customer success people come into meetings so that they can understand what the terminology is, and they can correct even the salesperson or the sales manager or the CEO when they're using terms incorrectly. And so I think there's this kind of a crowdsourcing, I guess I would describe it, aspect to it that will keep everybody keep everybody on the same page in terms of what things mean. Of course, that only works if you have the right culture. You have to have a culture where people can speak up, where people can, tell you when you're wrong or that you're, that you're being inconsistent or those kinds of things. But we could talk, that'd be another whole podcast, I think, if we talk about that. So.
But something that you mentioned that is rarely measured, and I think should be, is how often people do bring up where they see a misalignment. And it could be misalignment on themselves. I just got off this call. I misaligned to what we should have accomplished in that call. But if you set up a culture like you're saying, then I bet there's a way to facilitate letting a supervisor know that a junior employee believes there's a misalignment. To say, hey, boss, when you hopped in that call to coach me, I understand that it was supposed to look like this, but then you took it this way. Is that common policy? Is that what we're supposed to be doing? Because I wasn't really ready for that, and it knocked me off my game too. But to be able to bring that to a supervisor, that's definitely something that we could be able to measure. And I'll bet you that the more that communication goes up and down the chain of command, the better we all get.
There's no question about that. I mean, one of my biggest complaints as a CEO, quite frankly, is I don't get a lot of feedback. People don't want to tell me that I have no clothes on, right? But it's the thing that I value mostly, and so I think it's leading by example, I guess, is what I would say. Show by the way that you act that you're open to feedback and encourage feedback from people, and ask for feedback, ask for people to participate. Make that something you celebrate in the business. Make that something you celebrate among every team member there. And over time, people will get more and more comfortable. We set up a bunch of different ways of doing this. We have ways for people to provide anonymous feedback, which I think also makes people more comfortable doing things. Often you can tell by the feedback who the individual was, or at least what job role they had. So I think it has more to do with culture than anything else, to make sure that you're getting the benefit from everybody on the team.
No, that's great. So what we have here is an end-to-end system that allows us to really systemize how we use words and language. And only if we can do that will we know that we're following great process. And with great process, of course, gives us the ability to sell more and serve more. So thanks so much for building that with us. Russ, tell us about, where we can find more about you, your company, who you serve. If any of my listeners, know somebody that could benefit from it, how do we get deeper into your world?
Well, for me personally, you can reach me on LinkedIn or at my email address, which is rhawkins@agilentsinc.com. Now, Agilence is agile intelligence put together. So Agilence. And our website obviously is www.agilenceinc.com. And we'd love to hear from you. And I'd personally love to hear from any of your listeners that wanted to follow up on any of these ideas we talked about, or really about anything that's related to sales, management, or business. I'm excited about all of them.
Outstanding, sir. Well, for all the viewers here, make sure that you're subscribing to that YouTube channel, Bulletproof Selling. And if you're listening to us on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, anywhere that podcasts can be found, leave us a review and let other salespeople know. You no longer have to fall back on hope. With the insights of folks like Russ here on the show, you can remove hope from how you sell and how you serve. Russ, I can tell you're at the point in your career where you're all about giving back. So thank you for giving back to the sales community today. It's been awesome having you here and learning from you. Let's get out there and make selling